Good afternoon, everyone. The first item of business today is a statement by Fiona Hislop on the response to labour market statistics. The Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Fiona Hislop, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. COVID-19 is the biggest challenge we've faced in our lifetime. It is first and foremost a public health crisis, and this government makes no apologies for focusing squarely on the health challenges. It is only by suppressing the virus that we will enable the economy to recover and thrive. Because of this, we know that many economic indicators like Scotland's GDP and available job vacancies have deteriorated since lockdown measures were introduced. The latest official labour market statistics released this morning show that March to May this year, Scotland's unemployment rate rose to 4.3%, which is 120,000 people out of work. Scotland's employment rate fell to 74.1%, a total of 2,642,000 people in work. The claimant count rate has risen slightly over the last month to 7.7% in June after a steeper increase over the last few months. The rate has roughly doubled since March, a rise of over 100,000 claimants. But these statistics don't affect or reflect the full picture of our labour market, as the furlough scheme has protected many jobs. Latest information from HMRC shows that 736,500 workers in Scotland have been furloughed, and 155,000 of eligible self-employed people in Scotland made claims to the Self-Employed Income Support Scheme. Support schemes have been vital in keeping people in work, and without these, we estimate that unemployment could have risen to around 14%. Take-up rates for the Job Retention Scheme have been highest for accommodation and food services, with 74% of jobs furloughed, construction 72%, and arts, entertainment and recreation 66%. So these numbers make it even more disappointing that the Chancellor did not announce an extension to the Job Retention Scheme, particularly for the hardest hit sectors. And we know many people have already lost their jobs and household incomes have fallen. People are understandably anxious about what the future holds. Scottish Government analysis shows unemployment could rise to around 10%, which is approximately 275,000 people. And I welcome the Chancellor's announcement last week on support for the economy and jobs, including the Job Retention Bonus and Kickstart Scheme. The Chancellor's jobs plan may have had a headline value of up to £30 billion, albeit I know the OBR has since provisionally estimated this at around £20 billion. In any case, we should be clear, these estimates are highly uncertain and contingent on demand, and some measures may prove to be poorly targeted. The reality of last week's announcement is just 21 million of consequentials for the Scottish Government for the economy skills area. Let me be clear, these measures will not be sufficient to meet the scale of the challenge that remains and offer very little room for flexibility. In Scotland, we've already acted quickly to put in place a business support package of over £2.3 billion, but we know more needs to be done. That is why we took the decision last week to make an extra £100 million available in 2021 on top of the £33 million already committed for employability support this year, and the millions already in the skills system to help more people get the support they need to move back into work or retrain. Today, I want to outline how we will use that funding to help thousands of people back into work and boost the Scottish economy, focusing on three areas. Firstly, I recognise the impact that this crisis is already having on our young people. I also understand the potential long-lasting impacts for those who suffer periods of unemployment in their working life. That is why I've asked Sandy Begbie, who has a wealth of experience in supporting youth employment through the Edinburgh Guarantee and developing the young workforce, to offer industry leadership to develop an implementation plan for a job guarantee. This was one of the key recommendations from the advisory group on economic recovery, and we will set out more detail on the implementation plan of that in early August. We know we have to act quickly to protect the future of our young people, and to that end, I have decided to invest at least £50 million to support youth employment. This includes delivery of the job guarantee, and we will work with the UK government, local authorities, the third sector, trade unions, Skills Development Scotland and other partners to ensure no young person is left behind during this crisis. This initial commitment will not create any new structures or bodies, but build on the successful structures and partnerships we already have in place using the principles of no one left behind. It will also include additional investment in our internationally recognised youth employment strategy, developing the young workforce. We will listen to young people as we shape the guarantee, and in particular to those groups who we know are more likely to suffer disproportionately from a more challenging labour market. Our approach will be based on a set of ambitious principles that will support the aspirations of young people. These principles will make it clear that the job guarantee will be inclusive, with a clear focus on tackling inequalities and supporting young people into fair and sustainable jobs. Second, I know this is a hugely difficult and worrying time for thousands of people who have already been made redundant or who face the threat of redundancy as the furlough scheme unwinds. It is vital that we provide people with the support they need to retrain and move into new jobs and potentially even new sectors. We cannot ignore the need for additional support for those across all ages who are currently in precarious employment, or the need to skill up sectors of our economy as they restart. We need to develop a new retraining offer which can build on the existing skills, experience and expertise of our current workforce and help them to move quickly towards new jobs. Ensuring that training is relevant, reflects regional and sectoral demands and supports effective transitions in our labour market is important. But so too is the opportunity to reinforce our ambitions for a greener, smarter and more digitally enabled economic recovery. I will therefore bring forward proposals for a new retraining offer focused on helping those in sectors where there is the greatest risk of job losses. This new offer will help people gain the skills they need to move into new jobs in key growth sectors. This work will build on recent recommendations from the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery and the Enterprise and Skills Strategic Board. However, we will respond to both those reports fully by the end of this month. As I've already highlighted, I know this is a hugely worrying time for many people who face the threat of redundancy as the furlough scheme unwinds. So thirdly, I am committed to supporting people who find themselves in that situation, ensuring that they can access timely and effective support. Partnership Action for Continuing Employment PACE is the Scottish Government's initiative for responding to redundancy situations. Through providing skills, development and employability support, PACE aims to minimise the time affected by redundancy and those that are out of work, with support tailored to meet their needs and local circumstances. Through a truly partnership approach, working with the public, trade unions, third and private sectors, we will look to maximise resources to provide tailored support for those facing redundancy. And we know that the most vulnerable in society and those furthest from the labour market suffer most in times of recession. And we must do all we can to support them to progress towards and into work. To that end, the Minister for Business, Fair Work and Skills has today announced the extension of Fair Start Scotland services for a further 2 years to March 2023. This will provide support for unemployed people with disabilities, health conditions and other barriers to moving into fair and sustained work. This extension period is an opportunity to provide stability and continuity as we respond to the current COVID-19 crisis and move into our economic restart and recovery phases. We are facing unemployment at a scale not seen since the 1980s, and we are ready to rise to this challenge. A youth guarantee, a new national retraining scheme, and more funding so that we can provide immediate support and advice if you do unfortunately lose your job. Of course, this significant package of employment and training support can only be effective if it is aligned with a renewed commitment to fair work and embedded within a coordinated plan to support jobs growth and help business retain jobs through the period of ongoing uncertainty. We've already taken significant measures, such as the £230 million economic restart stimulus package announced last month. We are working closely through a range of sectoral forums, including hospitality and tourism and aerospace, to where possible retain and protect jobs. Our response to the advisory group on economic recovery's report will expand further on our approach for boosting employment, as will this year's programme for government. The relationships between government, business, unions and agencies forged or strengthened during this crisis will help underpin a new national effort to grow jobs and embed fair work. Today's statistics, Presiding Officer, confirm the scale of the impact the pandemic has had on Scotland's workers, businesses and communities. There is no doubt that meeting this challenge will require a national effort. This government will rise to that challenge, but there's no monopoly on good ideas. And I want to work constructively with parties across this chamber to protect our constituents. This government is passionately committed to building a wellbeing economy for Scotland, one that is environmentally sustainable, supports local communities, enables businesses to thrive and innovate, provides good jobs and fair work, and delivers inclusive growth, which meets the needs of people across all Scotland's communities. Even alongside the Chancellor's Youth Employment Scheme, that is unlikely to be all that we will need to do to support employment and skills over the next year, but it is a first step. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in the states, and I will allow around 45 minutes for that. It would be extra helpful if those members who wish to ask a question could press R in the chat function now, and I call first of all Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement. We welcome the extension of existing schemes announced today, but we are concerned that these are not tailored to protecting jobs in those sectors which are hardest hit. This is undoubtedly a result of the SNP's lack of business understanding. Today's job figures show 120,000 Scots out of work, taking unemployment to 4.3%. It would be even worse still if it were not for the British government intervening to save almost 900,000 Scottish jobs, including the worst affected sectors such as hospitality and tourism, which will also benefit from the VAT reduction. However, press reports today show English tourists are cancelling bookings due to fears over Nicola Sturgeon's quarantine comments. These comments are a material risk to Scottish jobs. So will the Cabinet Secretary outline what specific support will be provided, and will she assure English tourists they are welcome in Scotland?
Well, I was going to say thank you for your thank you for your comments and support in tackling this national endeavour. But if you want to spread doom and gloom, you have done so. We need confidence for our tourism sector. They have reopened fully in terms of hotels and restaurants and pubs indoors as of yesterday. That's good news. And the most important thing for people and tourists coming to Scotland from within the United Kingdom, from within Scotland, is that they will come to a place that has managed to suppress the virus to the extent that we can be confident that when you come here, you're coming to a place that is safe. Now we have to be vigilant. That's why we have to have mitigation. That's why we ask everybody coming to Scotland to respect the public health rules here. We also, I think it's an important message to say that if you are a tourist and staying somewhere that is not your home, that if you start to show the symptoms, you must immediately then contact Test and Protect. Don't wait till you go home or to see if you get better. But that is a plan that has provided a vigilance which will give people confidence, and it will also mean that those communities that are looking to welcome people can do so in a safe way. And if you haven't done so, please do look at the wonderful Orkney video that is quite clear that people are very welcome to come and stay there. They want to show the best of Orkney, but they want the people coming there to show the best of themselves and to respect the communities that they're going to. Now, that is the spirit that has led to Scotland being so attractive to so many people. But I also would add that we have provided more support for tourism than the rest of the United Kingdom in the terms of the Creative Tourism and Hardship Fund, also of the Pivotal Resilience Fund going to major companies in that area. These are funds that weren't available elsewhere. But it's also why the furlough scheme, which I do welcome, and I do thank the UK government for using the powers that they have, as other countries have done that have got those powers, to have a furlough scheme. In France, they've extended it. In Spain, they have. But I do think targeted support, and I agree, and this is the one point I would definitely agree with Maurice Gold on, we need targeted support. And that is why judicious extension of the furlough scheme in those sectors like tourism and hospitality that will suffer most because of this crisis can get continued support. And I will continue to argue that, as have my colleagues in Wales and Northern Ireland when we have been speaking to the UK government.
Richard Leonard.
Thanks, Deputy Presiding Officer. We know that 30% of all workers in Scotland are on the coronavirus job retention scheme, life support. And amongst young workers, they are twice as likely to be on that life support as older workers. So the challenge we face is big, but it's also urgent because the job retention life support will step by step be removed over the coming months and will then be switched off completely at the end of October. A week ago, I asked the First Minister if she would commit to introduce a quality jobs guarantee scheme in Scotland that was not based on low pay, that was not based on part-time employment, and would not just run for 6 months, which is the model being pursued by the Tory government at a UK level. And she told me that, I quote her, I think accurately, we are on the same side here, and that the Scottish scheme will be more comprehensive. But she didn't answer my question. So let me come back to one of those questions. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation has said today, and I quote them, the Scottish Government should work with employers to create good jobs. Employment and training should be conditional on paying the real living wage. So will the Cabinet Secretary give us a commitment today that any Scottish jobs guarantee scheme will be conditional on employers paying the real living wage?
So I do welcome Richard Leonard. I do welcome Richard Leonard's question. I do think these have to be quality placements and jobs. And I think the aspect of using the basis of the Kickstart proposal, I wish we'd been consulted on it first. We might have, again, I think, improved the quality of that because of our experience here in Scotland previously. And the example of the Edinburgh Guarantee is one which I would encourage Richard Leonard to look at, where that programme was about working with employers to make sure there were good quality jobs and to make sure there were proper jobs, and to make sure that the time that people had, it wasn't just part-time. But he's absolutely right to have a wraparound of that, of additional support and training. So it has to be absolutely purposeful and useful for the future prospects of these young people. I do believe in the real living wage, and I do think it's important that any package that we put together make sure that we have that as a bedrock of what we want to offer. But I don't want to preempt what will come forward in the implementation plan from Sandy Begbie, but I can reassure you that, as the First Minister said, we're on the right page here. And if everybody pulls it together, and if companies think what they can do to help this jobs guarantee, then I think we can come through a very difficult, challenging time in a way that gives our young people some prospects.
We now move to open questions, and I would like to allow everyone the opportunity to ask their questions. So if members could bear that in mind, that it is questions and not statements. We'll go to Annabel Euking, followed by Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary referred in her remarks to the assessment from the Office for Budget Responsibility to the effect that the UK Chancellor's recently trumpeted £30 billion package of support is actually worth less than £20 billion. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that this falls very far short of what in fact is required to protect people's jobs and people's livelihoods? And surely what we need from the UK government is urgent and proportionate action and not more smoke and mirrors.
So, Presiding Officer. In answering that question, I think we should consider the scale of the challenge. If you look at other countries, for example, Germany, their economic stimulus package was of the order of 4% of GDP, and this package is less than 2%. And I think in terms of the scale of what's needed, they really need to look again at capital, a new capital stimulus package. So, for example, the package that was promoted by the Prime Minister recently was a recycled capital, so therefore we didn't get consequentials. It wasn't new money coming into the system. So the scale is enormous. Other countries are tackling it with I think with the recognition of the scale of what's required. But even on if you would dispute the numbers and question whether it's 30 billion or 20 billion, these are big numbers. This is a big challenge for everybody. I appreciate that. But if it's untargeted, and I think that's the point, go back to the answer I gave to Maurice Golden, it's untargeted, so it's open-ended, and it's demand-led. It may not even realise that. So therefore, the idea that people have to wait till January to get that £1,000 support, for example, may mean that those companies that are really struggling may choose to not return people from furlough, and that will bring that cliff edge, the first cliff edge that we might see in October, and then another one back in January next year.
Donald Cameron, please, to be followed by Gordon MacDonald.
Last week, the much-loved restaurant Digby Chick in Stornoway announced it was closing, news which comes on the back of other hotel and restaurant closures across the Highlands and Islands. Does the Cabinet Secretary acknowledge how important the hospitality sector is to my region, and does she accept that her government's mixed messaging around quarantine is having a direct effect on the viability of that sector, which could potentially lead to further job losses?
Well, there aren't mixed messages. There aren't mixed messages. There is guidance that's set out that is quite clear. And in terms of the hospitality sector, it absolutely is crucial to all of Scotland. But I particularly recognise in his own region that for the Highlands and Islands is absolutely vital, and it helps support so many different businesses in every part of that region. But it's also why, for example, the differential position in unemployment, I think, can be understood, because tourism is more important to the Scottish economy relatively than it is to the UK as a whole, which is why we need to have additional and continuing support for that sector. It's why the Scottish Government put additional support in for that sector. So it will return resilient. It will be a challenge, but we need to support it. We have called for the VAT cut for some time. Of course, the tourism sector in Scotland had the second highest rate of VAT on tourism in any country in the European Union. So getting it down to a comparable level, I think, is really important, and I think that will help businesses. But we want our visitors to have confidence, and they want to know that they're coming to a place which has suppressed the virus, and we are suppressing the virus. And we need to still be vigilant, but that should give people confidence in coming and travelling to Scotland, that it's a good place to come. We have wonderful scenery, and we should start talking up the industry, supporting it, getting out and supporting our local restaurants, for example, as part of that economic recovery.
Gordon MacDonald, to be followed by Roger Grant.
The UK Government plans to replace the furlough scheme with a one-off £1,000 payment to businesses for each employee brought back to work. But there appears to be no mechanism in place to target the scheme towards jobs that are under threat Many companies will be able to claim the payment in cases where they plan to retain staff anyway. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that the UK Government should re-examine its plans to ensure that funding is better targeted to prevent job losses?
So I think job retention
Fiona?
is far better. I think job retention is far better than having to fund massive levels of unemployment. So keeping people in jobs that are already there is critical. So I do welcome the additional support, but as I said, it's not going to be realised January. And if it's going to everybody, and it's very blanket, it's very blunt, then it means that it's going to people and companies that might have already been planning to bring people back, and it's a bonus. Where I think what the member is saying, I think I've already said, is we need far more, at this stage of economic recovery, at this stage, far more targeted response. And I think there's a danger that being so blanket and blunt, it might not help exactly those companies who can't wait till January, who are struggling now and could have support. So do I think it should be better targeted? Yes. We'll get fuller details of the scheme towards the end of July from the United Kingdom, but that's the feedback I'll be giving them.
Rhoda Grant, please, to be followed by Billy Coffey.
The labour market statistics show that women's unemployment has increased by 51.3% since last year, and that's 3 times higher than the increase for men. This will be due to women working within the hospitality sector, but it's also due to the lack of childcare and uncertainty about school education, and it's having the effect of pushing back women's equality by decades. Will the Cabinet Secretary now include women of all ages in her job guarantee scheme and also ensure that childcare is available to all participants? Will she also prevail on the Education Secretary to provide women with a degree of certainty over education and childcare?
Hislop.
In terms of the point about supporting women, I think the member is absolutely right. The impact has been more severe on women and is likely to be so. And there's a degree of uncertainty, I understand, in terms of what will happen, but it all depends on suppressing the virus. I do think one of the best things for the economy is suppressing the virus sufficiently that our schools can indeed come back in August on a full-time basis. But I will leave that. I understand the Cabinet Secretary for Education, the Deputy First Minister, will be giving a statement shortly to the Chamber, and she may have an opportunity to address that question specifically to him. The jobs guarantee, I am unashamedly going to say, is focused on young people. If it's successful, there may be prospects to widen that, but I think in terms of the speed and swiftness with which we'll have to establish this, I think it's absolutely correct. Focus on young people, but of course many young people up to the ages of 24, 25 may be parents, and I recognise that access to childcare is a game changer. Good quality early learning and childcare is important for young people themselves in their development, but it's absolutely vital for parents and particularly women coming back into the labour market. So whether it's skills, whether it's training, whether it's on job support, I do believe that childcare is a fundamental part of that, and I will be championing that case. But I can't give her the firm guarantee that she's looking for just now, but I'm more than happy to engage in that discussion and continue that with her.
Willie Coffey, followed by Dean Lockhart.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Could the Cabinet Secretary advise what engagement the Scottish Government has had with the UK Government on the importance of fair work in the light of the Chancellor's statement last week?
Well, Presiding Officer, this government believes in fair work, and indeed, in response to some of the other questions, I do think commitments by employers to tackling the gender pay gap is very much part and parcel of this government's approach, and will be very much part of the fair work principles that were underlying all our programmes. Unfortunately, the UK government didn't speak to us before they announced the Kickstart programme. That's unfortunate because we have got good experience of this area from our experience from 10 years ago in the financial crash. I have written to the Secretary of State for DWP to engage with them, because I think it would make sense for us to work around what they're very, as Richard Leonard described it, a very sort of minimum package on Kickstart. So I think the more engagement the better, but it doesn't cost much to pick up the phone, and there are ideas everywhere which we're more than happy to share.
Dean Lockhart, followed by Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. According to figures released this morning, almost 20,000 applications for financial support by firms across Scotland remain outstanding. And according to the CBI, prevention is better than cure, in the sense that many of these firms need urgent support before they collapse, which would result in further unemployment in Scotland. So can the Cabinet Secretary explain what urgent actions are being taken by the Scottish Government to make sure these outstanding applications are processed as soon as possible? And Cabinet Secretary, it's not enough to expect local authorities to process these applications alone. As you said, this is a nationwide economic crisis, and it's time that we see real leadership from the Scottish Government on this front.
Fiona Hislop.
Well, the leadership that we provided was to move very swiftly indeed to set up not just the basic small business grants, but also the unique additional funds available from the Creative Hospitality and Tourism Hardship Fund and also the Pivotal Resilience Fund. But it is incorrect to say that there are 20,000 applications outstanding. I know the Conservatives keep banging on and thinking that somehow there's a queue of people still to get support. That's not the case. These are applicants that may have been multiple applicants, and they are also those that did not provide sufficient information, and there are those that would also have been refused because they're ineligible. And obviously, looking after the public purse, we can't allow fraudulent claims, for example. I just think it's very churlish, and I think it's very unappreciative of Dean Lockhart to dismiss local government workers, the length and breadth of this country, who processed these grants promptly, who made sure that over 100,000 companies received support. And I think they deserve recognition rather than attack from Dean Lockhart.
Richard Lyle, followed by Mark Russ. Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, we know that some sectors of the economy will perhaps take longer to restart to prevent the spread of the virus. Do you agree that consideration should be given to extending the scheme for sectors of the economy that will be unable to resume economic activity at the same pace as other sectors, particularly work sectors who have not previously been covered by the UK Government and in fact have been let down by the UK Government?
So the key areas of concern, I mentioned before, Presiding Officer, the key areas of concern are tourism and hospitality and culture. Many of these theatres, for example, are not open. That's why we've again used Scottish Government resources to help support theatre venues. Also, we need to look at oil and gas, not necessarily because of the COVID crisis particularly, but for other reasons as well. And also aviation and aerospace clearly impacted because of the collapse in tourism on a global level. That's also one of the reasons why, together with my counterparts and the economy ministers from Wales and Northern Ireland, we have written to the UK Government calling on them to establish a UK task force on aerospace. And why is that important? Because the supply chain skills, for example, in that sector, the engineering skills that we have in that sector can be used and preserved, yes, for the aerospace sector itself when it returns, and it will take some time with a global collapse of that sector to come back. But also they can be transitioned into other industries, particularly, I would hope, in terms of renewable energy in particular.
Mark Ruskell, to be followed by Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Investing in energy efficiency is the cheapest and most effective way of creating jobs in the construction sector, whilst also tackling the climate crisis and making homes cheaper to run. In June, the First Minister said that energy efficiency schemes should be upscaled this year, And since then, the UK Chancellor has announced that he will do this in England by reprioritising expenditure. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to confirm that the Scottish Government will reprioritise expenditure on energy efficiency? Does she agree with me that this could make a major contribution to the Jobs Guarantee Scheme?
Fiona Hislop.
Yes, I completely agree with that, and I've already had active discussions with other ministers, for example, Kevin Stewart, and I think his point about energy efficiency in buildings is well made. The greenest building is one that's already built, and it's important that in terms of that retrofit programme, in terms of moving to alternative energies, that we use the powers that we have and we make sure that in terms of developing jobs for young people, they can be in those sectors like renewable energy that he's mentioned, and particularly in the retrofitting side of that industry, to ensure that we can develop skills and training. So I'd like to move fairly rapidly on that. We will need the agreement of different employers as well, and that would be one of the priorities and early priorities of this government.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. In Shetland, a significant number of jobs has already been lost in the oil and gas and hospitality sectors, and I'm still regularly contacted by people who've fallen through the cracks in business support. So as we deal with the impact of the pandemic, an island's growth deal is more important than ever. When does the Scottish Government expect progress to be made with the UK Government to bring a deal forward?
Fiona Hislop.
So I have regular discussions. I have another one tomorrow with Nadeem Zahawi, the UK Minister in Bays, along with our Welsh and Northern Irish colleagues, and also with Alex Sharma as well. And one of the areas that we've been discussing with them is, one, the need for an energy or green energy, new capital stimulus, but the other is how we might make sure that the city deals and the growth deals that have been developed and have yet to be signed off can be signed off. We're starting to get extremely impatient on that, because I do think that can be used as part of the stimulus. Indeed, if you look at the Economic Advisory Group's report, that's one of the recommendations, is to make sure there is more of a regional approach. And the member's quite right to identify in her constituency that's two industries that have been particularly impacted in recent times, both in what is a very small geographic area, but hugely important, and therefore that's why we need to press ahead, not just with the islands growth deal, but with others. So message received and understood, and I will make sure and bring this subject up tomorrow when I speak to the UK Government.
To be followed by Alexander Burnett.
Cabinet Secretary, whilst times are tough, we need to ensure that we don't take any steps backwards in terms of tackling inequalities in employment. Can you provide assurance that steps are continuing to be taken to close the gender pay gap?
Fiona Hislop.
I agree with the member, and indeed I think that's an area Rhoda Grant also had picked up in her questioning. And women, as we know, have been at the front line of our response to coronavirus, and they are the majority of the workforce. They're more exposed now because of what's happened in terms of the types of job that they've been in terms of those areas like tourism, hospitality and retail, for example, that may be impacted as the furlough scheme unwinds and then that support isn't there. And so we do need to look at analysis of the gendered impact of the implications of COVID-19 and restarting the economy. I've already mentioned issues around support in childcare. But if we are to be that fair work nation, and if we are to take forward that fair work first policy, our flagship policy, it means that we have to ask employers to commit to take action to tackle the gender pay gap. One of the immediate actions I can let you know is that we've provided £89,000 in funding the Flexibility Works programme to support employers to develop flexible practices enabling women with caring responsibilities to access good quality flexible jobs. Now, caring shouldn't and isn't solely a female responsibility, but the reality is we know that during COVID, studies seem to show, research seems to show that women were shouldering more of that caring burden. So we have a responsibility to these women, and I want to make sure that this government develops policies and support for women. It's going to be a challenge, and again, it's one of the areas I'm more than happy to work with all members of the Chamber to identify ways that we can.
Alexander Burnett, followed by Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Now, constituents have contacted me in the past, in particular around the transition training programme the Scottish Government established, to complain that despite being overqualified elsewhere for a particular job, they were failing in applications because they did not possess a particular Scottish qualification. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, does she recognise the importance of the UK single market, and will she expedite the equivalence of qualifications across the United Kingdom to ensure a flexible employment pool?
Well, I think that. Thank you, President Officer. I mean, the biggest single market is a European single market, and the biggest challenge to jobs after COVID is going to be Brexit. So that's that is the challenge, because leaving the biggest single market that we could operate on is going to have a real impact on jobs and training. But your point about training in particular, and the point about qualifications, that's something we can certainly look at for the retraining funds that I've just announced as part of that £100 million package today, because transition training to upskill and reskill individuals that are facing redundancy is really important. The opportunity to try and support people while they're still in furlough is also one that I know colleges are looking at, and the Economic Advisory Group's report has been quite clear that this should be an education-led recovery. I've said clearly that I think colleges who can move rapidly and swiftly to present upskilling and reskilling opportunities are really well placed, and yes, other training providers as well. Now, we have some experience, which I think he's referring to, from the oil and gas transition fund from the crisis there a few years ago, so we'll learn from that. There were many good successes from that, but clearly what we want to do is to make sure that we've got a good support mechanism to develop skills in the supply chains of the industries that already exist, but also those that we want to ensure develop, and particularly in digital, and particularly in areas in relation to renewable energies. And particularly for the North East, we have already, as the member might be aware, developed a £62 million energy transition fund, and that is deliberately to help support opportunities, new opportunities for the very talented and experienced supply chain for the oil and gas industry, and to help them move into new areas. And that also is a challenge, because we need to do more, for example, in having a serious hydrogen strategy. And again, that's something we discussed with the UK government, that some of the issues that they can help with aren't even necessarily always going to be in the financial area. We need an economic stimulus, yes, in this area, but also on some of the transmissions and regulations. But we need to ensure that those jobs are there. But I think the very practical point he makes about making sure the scheme's wide enough to look at qualifications in the round is something I will take back to those developing that fund.
Neil Bibby, followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The COVID health crisis has hit the west of Scotland harder than any other region, with Inverclyde recording the highest death rate in the country. North Ayrshire and Western Bartonshire already report the highest unemployment rates in Scotland, and we are losing thousands of aerospace and airport jobs in Renfrewshire. The Scottish Government used to have a national performance framework target on tackling regional inequality, which aimed to reduce the employment gap within Scotland, but this was abandoned at the end of 2017. Given the disproportionate effect this virus is having on areas like the West, will the Scottish Government agree to introduce new employment-based regional inequality targets? And does the Cabinet Secretary agree that areas that have the highest levels of unemployment and redundancies should get additional resources and support?
Fiona Hislop.
So I think the member makes a very serious point about the disproportionate impact COVID has had on health, but also in economic terms in particular parts of the country. I will certainly consider his suggestion. I'm not going to necessarily commit to it at this stage, but I do think we need to find ways of becoming more regional in our support. And that means whether it's on the skills retraining, being more focused on those needs and being prepared to be perhaps brave to move from traditional sectors in those areas to move into new areas in that skills and retraining. So in terms of the challenges that might bring, as the member might be aware, we have challenges, particularly from local government, in terms of the distribution of funds being established on an existing formula that they have agreed, and so therefore there may be some issues that we may need to resolve with local government if there was to be far more targeted support for different parts of the country. We're starting to see the experience of the differences in terms of the furlough and the experiences in different areas. Indeed, it's interesting, Highlands and Islands is an issue raised earlier on by one of the members, is one of the highest in terms of those on furlough. So it is impacting in different ways. So instead of rushing to necessarily say which parts of the country should get what now, I think it is going to be important for us to look at the different experiences in terms of the furlough, in terms of the labour stats, the disproportionate impact it has in different areas. But I think Inverclyde and the west of Scotland already had to be a target in terms of support. It's facing a lot of depopulation in terms of numbers, and so therefore trying to think about how we can encourage more jobs into that area is really important. And the other thing I would say is that we have to think differently about how the world will be. You could quite easily see a situation where the flexibility of home working can continue. It doesn't need to be necessarily 5 days a week in your home and never going to an office. But there will be an opportunity for people to think, actually, do you know, we can have lower cost bases, but we can ensure that people can work and live in areas that are in the west of Scotland, for example, in areas that have been facing depopulation, rather than necessarily expecting everybody to be in our cities or to be close to our cities and be on a commuting basis on a daily basis. So we have to think differently about how we might go about work in the future.
John Mason to Fulton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I take the point that today we've got some quite serious unemployment figures, and these may in fact get worse. But we have been very dependent on international workers coming into Scotland, and we've needed them in agriculture, in health and social care and these sectors. So does the Cabinet Secretary feel that we still need these workers, and is the UK doing enough to allow them to come here?
Fiona Hislop.
I definitely feel strongly that we need migrant workers supporting our health and social care systems. We have relied on people coming to this country, working in our health and care system to help suppress virus, to help deal with the real challenges in terms of our hospitals in recent months, in our care homes. And the idea that we turn around to them now and say, turns around to them now and say you're not welcome. And I think the Conservatives who challenged me about how welcoming Scotland is at this moment in time should really seriously think about what the UK is doing, telling people who want to come here, who can help us with much needed skills in our health and care departments, that they are unwelcome, is one of the most shocking things that I've seen coming out of this current UK government in relation to what it's doing with Brexit. And yes, we're living with COVID, and we'll be living with COVID for some time to come. But the new immigration rules do not serve Scotland, do not serve our health and care system, and will be very, very damaging indeed. I want a Scotland that is safe. I want a Scotland that is confident in itself, and I want a Scotland that welcomes those who want to work with us in building a new Scotland and ensuring that we have a health and care system that can look after our sick, that can look after our elderly. And so, Presiding Officer, to hear the UK government at this time, of all times, thinking they can press ahead with one, this migration system, but two, Brexit, when we should be concentrating on focusing on tackling and rebuilding our economy following the COVID crisis. I think it is one of the most disheartening aspects of the recent developments in the last few weeks.
Jamie Halcrow-Johnson, followed by Gilpatrick.
It's positive that the Scottish Government has welcomed the proposal for a jobs guarantee scheme, which is focused on young people. emerged from the Independent Advisory Group on Economic Recovery. Given the Cabinet Secretary herself referred to the need for swiftness on this, can she advise me when the scheme is likely to become available and when employers are expected to be able to sign up to the scheme? And also what progress has been made involving universities, colleges, apprenticeship providers and employers at this stage?
Fiona Hislop.
I thank the member for his question. The implementation plan for the scheme will be produced by Sandy Bedby for the beginning of August. He's already talking with those that can help deliver this. And so therefore we need to, as I said, to move rapidly, because we will see coming through the summer period, obviously there are summer leavers from education, but also we'll be seeing the unwinding of the furlough schemes. So therefore moving into this new job guarantee scheme is going to be an important and a swift development that will help the labour market in particular. So I can't give you an absolute timescale for that, but I can say that it will be as published in the implementation plan in a few weeks' time at the beginning of August. So in terms of his other points about universities and colleges, the Deputy First Minister, myself and Richard Lockhead, the Higher and Further Education Minister, and Jamie Hepburn, the Business and Skills Ministers, collectively met with the chairs and chief executives of the Scottish Development Scotland in terms of skills and training, and the Scottish Funding Council, deliberately to address the points he's making about how universities and colleges can respond. Colleges are already responding. They're not waiting to be given instruction, because the best colleges are those that are already in tune with the needs in their local areas. I know, for example, in my area, in West Lothian, there are 4 East of Scotland colleges working together in providing a response, particularly in short-term courses, and that adaptability. If you think what Glasgow College did, for example, previously, in taking workers from retail and giving them short courses to help them move into financial services to be recruited by Barclays. That's a good example of what can be done, and at relative speed as well. So these are the areas that we need to focus on. Also in relation to universities, making sure that there's far more provision that can be met in terms of tackling the demand more for on the digital side, and also on renewables and energy. And looking also at graduate apprenticeships. Graduate apprenticeships could be really helpful in this area. So apprenticeship aspects will also be part of the funding that I've announced today. We previously had a scheme after the financial crisis focusing on a mechanism called Adopt an Apprentice, to make sure that apprentices that have been made redundant could be taken on by another employer with some support, financial support. And also those apprentices that have been made redundant, ways that they can carry on at least the skills aspect, even if they're not in employment. So the member raises a very important part, which hasn't been touched on in other questions today, on exactly the package on that retraining side, and how we can make sure, as part of the wider support for young people, not just the jobs guarantee, that we can also be looking at universities and their provision.
And the last question in this statement is from Gil Patterson.
Officer, does the Cabinet Secretary share my view that for the UK Government to reimpose benefit sanctions at a time of such an economic uncertainty is not only cruel but counterproductive, as it will push people further into financial hardship during the crisis? Further, does the Cabinet Secretary believe that investing to keep people in fair work is a far better option, and the social costs resulting from higher levels of unemployment that will be devastating for people?
Fiona Hislop.
Yes, I do agree with that. Keeping people and retaining people in jobs is easier than necessarily having to create new jobs. Now, with any recession, there's always a disruption to a market, and there'll be new and emerging companies, and repositioning of many companies into different areas, and that's part of the economic market response. But I do think that if they look at the cost of this, the UK government should seriously look at the continuing support for those sectors that are effectively still closed, because across the UK, major events have had, they will be one of the last to return, for example, and other areas that will not necessarily realise the levels of income they had and will still be just surviving through this period. And there'll be a lot of companies that and maybe get through until next year when they're having to repay their bounce back loans, or when they're getting through to having to pay their deferred tax, for example, from HMRC. So that's a real danger, and so therefore keeping in jobs is essential. And I think your point about sanctions is really important. There's a moral argument, I could say, but there's also a very practical one. And there is no place within a system that needs to support people to have a sanctions basis. So the conditionality and mandation that they have, certainly we'd make sure that there was no aspects of that in anything that we would do, and we would encourage the UK government that sanctions should have no part to play in a system that is there to support people. And if you've got up to 10% of people unemployed, a sanctions system is just going to cause more misery. And I think at this time, our job and responsibility in the UK government's jobs and responsibilities is to support people, not to punish them.
Thank you, everyone. And that concludes the Ministerial Statement on the response to labour market statistics. And this meeting is suspended.